wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast. This is Steve, coming to you from what was just briefly a snowy Conway, Arkansas. The snow is melting now, but we had an unexpected March snowstorm. It was pretty nice. Anyway, I hope things are well with you. I'm trucking along. I just finished my first semester with the College of Stoic Philosophers, finished their section on logic, and actually one of my assignments was to read a book that I'm going to recommend to those of you who want to look into Stoicism at a deeper level than you might get from a introductory textbook, and that book is called Hellenistic Philosophy, Stoics, Epicureans, Skeptics by A.A. Long, 2nd edition. And I'll warn you, there's another book that I actually bought by accident thinking I had this book, and that was called The Hellenistic Philosophers by A.A. Long. It's also a very good book with a lot of quotes from primary Stoic sources, but they are very different. This book that I first referenced, Hellenistic Philosophy, is kind of a summary of these philosophies, whereas the second book I mentioned has a lot more primary texts from the Stoics, the Epicureans, and the Skeptics. But this is a very in-depth book about primarily pre-Roman Stoicism, but it has a lot of detail, a lot of depth to it. So not the book you want if you're just going to practice Stoicism after reading, Massimo's book or something. But if you want to go deeper and understand it better so you can get more out of Marcus Aurelius, understand where Epictetus and Seneca are coming from, then it's probably a good choice for you to look at those texts in a little bit greater detail. This week, I am going to follow up on something that I read in this text, and that was an excerpt from On Ens, or De Finibus, by Cicero, where he is talking a little bit about Stoic ethics, Stoic morality, where it all comes from. And one thing I want to point out that's kind of important that I guess I knew before but hadn't really understood the significance before, and that is that Stoicism was at the time a complete coherent philosophy, meaning at least from my view, they had everything aligned between all their subject matter. Everything was a comprehensive whole that fit together like puzzle pieces, and which means if you reject part of it, the whole thing comes crashing down. Which is why most of us make a distinction between traditional Stoicism, which is the Stoics that even today accept the divine cosmos and the logos as a literally true thing, versus modern Stoicism, which it comes at it from a more secular approach, keeps the ethics, but says, listen, we don't buy the idea that the cosmos is a living, rational being and humans are endowed with a spark of nature. The ancient Stoics would have said, well, you can't have our morality without our view of how the cosmos works, but that's why we designate it as modern Stoicism. It's not simply old Stoicism brought back to life. We're editing it based on modern science, modern knowledge, modern ideas. So those are two ways of viewing things. But the Stoics, the ancient philosophy that fit together like puzzle pieces that were interlocking, and you remove one and the whole thing falls apart. They based their view of human nature on this concept known as oikiosis. This idea that we start off at birth at loving ourselves in terms of, what I mean by that is in terms of self-survival. We look out for our own survival as much as we can. And also, at the same time, also our parents of various species seem to love or care for whatever reason, their children. And these are the basis of then all human society. We expand on that as we age. We build on it. It grows into loving your family. It grows then into loving your community. It grows into serving and loving your country, and then perhaps ultimately loving all rational beings in the cosmopolitan, city of the earth, as the Stoics like to talk about. So I want to go over some of these aspects of cosmopolitanism and oikeiosis, this idea that we appropriate this love of self and then build on it and expand on it to a love of all humanity, and then using rationality as we grow older. So we're going to hear from Cicero and Seneca today, and then we'll have a little chat about it. Moral Letters to Lucilius by Seneca, Letter 121, on Instinct in Animals.
This art is born, not taught, and for this reason no animal is more skilled than any other. You will notice that all spider webs are equally fine, and that the openings in all honeycomb cells are identical in shape. Whatever art communicates is uncertain and uneven, but nature's assignments are always uniform. Nature has communicated nothing except the duty of taking care of themselves and the skill to do so. That is why living and learning begin at the same time. No wonder that living things are born with a gift whose absence would make birth useless. This is the first equipment that nature granted them for the maintenance of their existence, the quality of adaptability and self-love. They could not survive except by desiring to do so, nor would this desire alone have made them prosper. But without it nothing could have prospered. In no animal can you observe any low esteem or even any carelessness of self. Dumb beasts, sluggish in other respects, are clever at living. So you will see that creatures which are useless to others are alert for their own preservation. Farewell.
De Finibus by Cicero, Book 3, Number 6.
That which is in itself in accordance with nature, or which produces something else that is so, and which therefore is deserving of choice as possessing a certain amount of positive value, axia, as the Stoics call it, this they pronounce to be valuable. And on the other hand, that which is contrary of the former they term valueless. The initial principle being thus established, that things in accordance with nature are things to be taken for their own sake, and their opposites similarly things to be rejected. The first appropriate act is to preserve oneself in one's natural constitution. The next is to retain those things which are in accordance with nature, and to repel those that are to the contrary. Then, when this principle of choice and also of rejection has been discovered, there follows next in order choice, conditioned by appropriate action. Then, such choice becomes a fixed habit. And finally, choice fully rationalized and in harmony with nature. It is this final stage that the good, properly so called, first emerges and becomes to be understood in its true nature.
De Finibus by Cicero, Book 3, Number 19.
Again, it is held by the Stoics to be important to understand that nature creates in parents an affection for their children, and parental affection is the source to which we trace the origin of the association of the human race in communities. This cannot but be clear in the first place from the conformation of the body and its members, which by themselves are enough to show that nature's scheme included the procreation of offspring. Yet it could not be consistent that nature should at once intend offspring to be born, and make no provision for that offspring, when born, to be loved and cherished. Even in the lower animals, nature's operation can be clearly discerned. When we have observed the labor that they spend on bearing and rearing their young, we seem to be listening to the actual voice of nature. Hence, as it is manifest that it is natural for us to shrink from pain, so it is clear that we derive from nature herself the impulse to love those to whom we have given birth. From this impulse, it is developed the sense of mutual attraction, which unites human beings as such. This also is bestowed by nature. The mere fact of their common humanity requires that one man should feel another man to be akin to him. For just as some parts of the body, such as the eyes and ears, are created, as it were, for their own sakes, while others, like the legs or the hands, also subserve utility of the rest of the members, so some very large animals are born for themselves alone. With human beings, this bond of mutual aid is far more intimate. It follows that we are by nature fitted to form unions, societies, and states.
Okay, so Seneca introduces the idea today that all animals look out for themselves. They have this inborn rational sense of self-preservation, but also parents look out for their young, and that's something that we have as humans as well. But then Cicero is going to go on to say, okay, then we build on this phenomenon. We add to it, we accrete more onto that as we age and become closer to sagehood, especially if we're developing as humans, and then only if we're developing as philosophers do we continue to the full fruitful conclusion of human development. So the first stage of this, and I may not go into this exactly as Cicero does, but the first stage of this is that we look out for ourselves. We want to nurse as a baby. We cry to be kept warm. We're looking out for ourselves. But then as children, we build on that and we start selecting things according to nature, rejecting things against nature. My interpretation of that is we ask for food, we ask for things, we reject. We don't want to be sick. We don't want illness. We don't want things that are bad for us. We start to choose, and sometimes we choose poorly. We're learning how to choose. We choose things that are bad for us sometimes. We're making mistakes. But as we get older, we get better at making choices of things that are for our health and reject things that are against our well-being. We get better and better at it. And then, ideally, what happens then is we get better and better at this. We become better at making these selections on a regular basis. We perform these selections continuously, as Cicero might say, almost without even thinking about it. We start choosing what's best for us, what is according to nature, rejecting what is against. And finally, if we grow as Stoics, all of our choices not only are what's good for us and we reject what's bad for us, but our choices become perfect in terms of fully aligning with the will of divine nature, as it were. We never choose poorly. We always choose correctly, and we do so for the right reasons at the right time. We take appropriate actions, make appropriate choices, which means fully rational choices at the right time for the right reasons, and that is our developmental pathway. The other reading by Cicero once again emphasizes, I believe, the notion that the family bond is also kind of the basis for oikeiosis, this love of humanity that hopefully we foster as we develop. So as we grow, we make better and more wise choices, and also as we grow, we expand our love. I can hear my son yelling in the background, so I apologize if you hear that too. But we expand our devotion from ourselves to a purely selfish way of living to our family, to our loved ones, to our community, to our nation, which becomes a rational choice as we learn more and more, become more and more rational, and start using more and more of our divine, as it were, rationality, our seat of reason within our brain or within our soul. We strengthen that, we exercise it. So we still look out for our body and our well-being, but that is a childish thing in terms of it's a very basic thing. Now we're developing the powers of rationality as we mature. We still look out for ourselves when possible, but we're cultivating reason, and reason takes over basic instincts, and we cultivate that as our divine calling. It is the gift of nature that we all have that we need to build on and cultivate. This also goes back to those rings of concern, which I'm sure you've seen, the spheres of concern, where we are at the center, and then our families outside of us, and our community, and our nation, and then Kai Whiting et al. Added on like nature and animals outside of that. And we're trying to contract that ring back towards ourselves as we use rationality, as we develop as more beyond our self-interest into using rationality to see that we're part of a cosmic whole. We're trying to collapse those circles, bring them closer to ourselves, to see that our self is not the center of all things, but our relationships with all are what is important. And we serve others. We're not here for others to serve us. And that's kind of what we're trying to do as we mature, as we grow, as we build on what nature gave us. So that's something to chew on. Think about, where are you in that scheme of things? Are you still simply choosing what's good for you at an infantile level, looking out for yourself at all times? Are you making rational choices, maybe failing a lot at what's good for you? Do you feel that you're making pretty rational choices all the time? And if so, are you expanding those choices beyond yourself for the good of those around you? And ultimately, are you making choices that make sense all the time? I highly doubt it, because we're not sages. We make mistakes. But that's what we're shooting for if we're trying to be the Stoic sage. I kind of like the folks that are from the middle Stoa. I think it's like I always get his name wrong. Posidonius. I always want to say Poseidonus. And Palladius, I think. They talked a lot more about, kind of like Epictetus does, to kind of ignore the sage. That we kind of grow out of that as we move into Roman philosophy a little bit, away from the Greeks, and we focus more on, how do you live every day as a good person? The sage is an okay metaphor to have, but no one's ever going to be there. It's kind of like a god. I view the sage as basically a human god. And I think it's absolutely impossible that a human would reach the kind of sagehood that the ancient Stoics talked about. I think they didn't realize that mental processes like we have in our heads are caused by synapses and chemicals and electrical signals, and there's probably no way to perfect that. It's not some mystical thing that causes rationality. It's flesh and blood and synapses, and therefore it is probably by definition imperfectible. Just like it's impossible to have the perfect computer or the perfect car. There will always be a little flaw here or there. So but you can perfect what you have to the best of the equipment's capabilities. And I think that's what sagehood is. Realistic sagehood is being the best, making the best use of what you got. Is probably the closest thing that we will ever have to sagehood. And I can tell you this, I'm sure I'm far from that level of perfection. And of course, we're influenced by our upbringing, things outside of our power that influence us as we grow up, that we have to overcome, work around, or that will always be there. External things that are going to influence how far we can perfect ourselves. So this philosophy stuff's complicated. And it gives you a lot to think about. So think about how are you progressing? Are you making more and more rational choices as you go? Or are you falling backwards? And I hope... Oh, my son's crying. I'm going to cut this short, gang. Being a podcaster is hard. I better run. My son's bawling in the next room. Carpe diem!